instead
I
of
think it's gotten
learning the
to be a
truth.
matter of ego for some people. Have you also noticed that this issue suffers from, I call it the bouncing clown syndrome? As soon as you smack down one lie,
Hi, welcome back, Terry. How you doing?
hey, doing good. Good to see you again, Scott.
All right. So today we're going to talk about why it can be hard to inform people about the harm of circumcision because even after you do, they will still want to do this to their son anyway.
Yes, that is true.
I know that conformity is a part of human survival. People had to do what the masses were doing to be accepted. I think that's one of the factors.
Okay.
In this such a case, though, I think that's a bit counterintuitive because it's actually physically harmful to the person. In fact, some babies die during this process.
I would dare to bet that many go underreported or they blame it on some other reason. Let's say, oh, they had pneumonia or they had, something else.
Heart
And
failure.
yeah, heart failure. I would challenge them to look at the numbers for SIDS.
What tends to cause SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome?
I would like to ask that question. I would like to know if circumcision is a contributing factor. I would say that it is, because when you put somebody through that much trauma that early in their lives, I don't see how it could not.
The harm of circumcision, I believe, has been concealed by the false medical benefit claims,
Right.
and that's the
Exactly.
propaganda.
Yep.
And it can be hard to convince people that those statements are lies. So if you were out talking to someone and they really wanted to hear the truth, they really were interested in what you know on this subject, and they're the average American who does believe those things, how would you convince them that it's not true?
In my years of experience, you can't convince them. You can tell them the facts, you can prove your point, and then they'll just shut you down. And I've gotten quite ugly with some people. For example, one person would not listen to the medical facts, and they finally just said, well, it has to be done. That's all there is to it. And then I said to them, you say you're a Christian, correct? And they said, yeah. I said, then does God make mistakes? And then they get really irate and start quoting scripture, which is absolutely hilarious, you know? And you can't even prove it to them that it was done away with in the Bible. They'll stick to the fact that it has to be done, whether it's medically or religiously. They stick to their guns. I've found that there really is no convincing someone who has their mind set on it. And I think that's a shame.
Do you think that the reason is because it's about conformity within their family as well?
Conformity within the family and within society. I don't know how many times I've heard this, and it drives me crazy to hear this. Well, I want my little boy to look like me. And I remember I countered one guy by saying, "Well, my son has a scar on his left side from an appendix operation. If he had a son, should his son also have a scar?"
How is it that we can keep people logical when we talk about this subject when it tends to trigger emotional responses from them?
I don't know. That is a tough one. All I know is that you try to argue facts, and it's like this with so many people. They don't want to hear the facts. They want you to agree with them, and that's it. And like I said, I don't know how you get through to some people, because I'll give you an example. When my son was born, there were four women that said, "Did you have your son circumcised?" One, we said no, we didn't. One of them said, "Great, I'm against it anyway." The second one said, "Great, my son isn't either." The other two just looked at us kind of funny, and they had boys and they had it done anyway. And then later on, these two ladies looked at us and said, "If I had known what was going to happen, I would have never let that happen." And I said, "We tried to tell you. The dad wanted it done, so that's what happened."
What I've noticed is with parents who do regret it, some of them are still more focused on their own feelings instead of
Yeah,
instead
I
of
think it's gotten
learning the
to be a
truth.
matter of ego for some people. Have you also noticed that this issue suffers from, I call it the bouncing clown syndrome? As soon as you smack down one lie, another one pops up. I've heard the most outrageously stupid things of rationalizing and justifying this operation. And of course, the last one to come about was that it helps prevent AIDS.
Yeah, statistics prove that is not true.
Of course, and when you show people these statistics, they still don't believe you. Well, where'd you get that information from? And I tell them where I got the information from, and they, oh, I don't believe that. Here's what I've noticed, and I don't want to sound too cynical. When people believe something, you almost never can change their minds because they're entrenched in their belief. And no matter if it's true or false and how you prove it to them, they do not want to change. You can try to prove to somebody, you know, flat earthers. Some people absolutely will not have their mind changed that the earth is flat. They believe it, and that's all there is to it. And you can't prove it otherwise. And the same with circumcision. It's such an accepted thing in our society that people want to believe that it's okay, and they'll make up some reason for it. They don't want their boy to be made fun of in the locker room, or it's easier to keep clean, or this or this or this. But the truth of the matter is, when you start to flip the script on them and say, well, why don't they do that to girls? They'll say, oh, you can't do that to girls. And I go, well, they have higher infection rates than boys do. And for some reason, they just don't want to listen. It's confounded me over the years. I've been an activist since 1980, and I just can't believe all the crappy reasons that people drum up for this.
Do people realize it's a double standard to defend it, cutting boys and say it's wrong to cut females?
Well, you know what's so funny? I remember one woman I dated a long time ago. She had her son cut because her ex-husband wasn't cut and he kind of smelled bad. I said, well, maybe the guy just didn't know how to clean himself, you know? She worked for a pediatrician's office, and this was hilarious. She said they had girls come in there, teenage girls and pre-teenage girls that smelled really bad. And I said, well, why don't you cut them too? I could not believe what her answer was. You know what it was? Well, there's nothing there to cut.
Oh, okay. Did you question that? Would you follow
I
up
did.
with? How'd you respond to
I did.
that?
I did. I said, are you joking? I said, you have the same anatomical parts that I do in different forms. And I explained this all to her, and she just gave me this look like deer in the headlights.
Yeah. And if there's this odor, then it's coming from somewhere, right?
Yeah, well, the thing of it is, if you're so stupid you can't teach your kid how to keep himself or herself clean, that's a reflection of you, not the kid. There's one woman I remember years ago told me, she said, if there's a problem with an uncircumcised man, it's not the penis that has the problem, it's the owner that has the problem. You have to brush your teeth, you have to take a shower, you have to wash behind your ears. What's so different about this?
So why do you think this concept of normal, like when you mentioned don't want to get made fun of in the locker room, is such a big deal in America? How did it get to that extreme?
I'm really not sure because I was never made fun of because of that in the locker room. And the one guy that did make fun of me was for a different reason. It was because I reached puberty way before anybody else did. And he kind of made fun of me. And I said, at our age, don't you think we should be looking at girls instead of guys? And I never had a problem again. I got hair growth like at age 11. I was shaving at age 12. I had pubic hair at age 11. So that's what happened. And he sort of thought that was the funniest thing. And he poked fun of me. I said, we should be looking at girls instead of guys. Don't you think? Because back then you did not want to be thought of as gay. You really didn't back then.
Not very socially acceptable at that time.
No, in the 1960s, heavens no. You didn't want that tag. So I don't understand this thing about, he's going to be made fun of in the locker room. Just that baffles me too. If that was the case, then, we would always stay clothed all the time. Of course, nobody takes gang showers anymore, from what I understand.
How do you think the medical industry created propaganda to really promote this?
I'm not exactly sure how they gained traction with it. All I know is that all of my cousins who were older than me, they were all cut. And they were born in the late 1930s all the way up until 1947 or so. And they were all cut. And that's going way back before I was born in 1951. And they were all cut. And it was just a doctor who promoted it. A doctor told my aunt, this is what has to be done. It prevents infection and it's this and this and this. And she believed it.
What started telling the doctors that and getting them to believe it so they would tell people when it wasn't happening before?
I don't know. I do have an interesting story to tell you though with my adopted mom. I had a Jewish doctor as a pediatrician in New York City. He looked at my mom and said, "Do you want your son circumcised?" And she looked at him and said, "Is this really necessary?" And he looked at her and said, "No."
That's good coming from a Jewish fan.
Yeah, exactly. And even now, when my son was born, he ended up with two pediatricians that were really good. Their names were Owens and Clattenburg, and they were really good. They kept telling people, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, until finally they stopped doing them. And people still came to me and said, "Oh, you won't do that? I'll have to go find somebody else to do it." Even though they wanted people not to do this anymore, people were still clamoring for it. In 1987, when Blue Cross of Vermont stopped paying for these things, the circumcision rate really didn't go down much because people were paying out of pocket. They didn't care.
Well, that's a symptom that the brainwashing is set in.
I went back to college in the 1990s to go get my bachelor's degree. And in one class, this woman was complaining, "I had to pay $150 to have my son circumcised because the insurance wouldn't pay for it."
You should have told her,
Yeah,
well, you wasted your money
I more or less indicated, well, you paid a lot for an operation. It isn't necessary.
to maim your son.
Yeah, essentially, she told me to shut the F up.
That she didn't respond well.
That surprised me. I figured when Blue Cross of Vermont stopped paying for these things, that the rates would go down, and it hardly moved much.
Would you still want this movement to attempt to get that to stop, to get medical insurance companies to stop paying for this across the country?
Absolutely. I can only say this, though, when the NHS, the National Health Service in England, when they stopped insuring and stopped paying for these things, the rate went from 50% to 1%. Maybe the Brits are a little smarter than we are.
Better with their finances.
As far as I can tell, the only people that are circumcised in Great Britain are Muslims and Jews. And that's a subject I ain't even going to get into.
I want to figure out where the propaganda came from, how it's being distributed, and how people can resist it, meaning not believe it, debunk it, think for themselves, think more critically.
Didn't it
It's
start out
difficult to
with,
get people to become critical thinkers.
yeah, didn't it start with Kellogg?
I don't think it started with him. I know he was involved. I know he had a part of it in Battle Creek, Michigan, where he thought masturbation was very bad for you, and this was his solution. And he was also cutting the females too, or using acid
Yeah,
to burn them.
yeah. I remember somebody telling me about in the 1950s, they tried to start circumcising girls, but the backlash was so bad that they stopped. But when it came to boys, the backlash was almost nothing. I do remember, however, in the 60s and part of the early 70s, hospitals were just doing this without even asking the parents, and a lot of parents became very irate and they filed lawsuits.
Why do you think that didn't put a stop to it? Do you think that made any difference or what? Because if it's still going today, I don't know if it mattered that much.
All they do now is they have to ask. I don't know how many women I've talked to, a couple of women, they told me, they said, when I was asked that, I didn't even know what it was. Now, when my stepdaughter had her children, they showed her a video because she didn't know what it was either. And finally, she said, "There's no way that's happening to my kids." Well, she had two girls and one boy, and he remained intact, of course.
That's good.
But I can flip it over to my granddaughter, who saw this as a medical student and was horrified by it. But her husband insisted it be done to his boy, and it was. I'm not very close to them anymore. I stay my distance and I don't say much.
Hey guys, it's me, Pods. I'm briefly interrupting this interview to let you know about the Pods e-commerce program. It is vital to keeping the Prevail over the System channel alive. Go and join us on our Discord to learn more. And best of all, it's free to partake in the Pods e-commerce program, and we don't need any of your information whatsoever. This helps us keep the interviews coming along with other Intactivist content to empower, teach, and update Intactivists with very important information, as well as being the voice for the Intactivist public. Thank you all so much. Okay, now back to the interview.
How is it you think we can use this information to inform the public when we're doing public demonstrations and encountering people to educate them?
To tell you the truth, at this point in time, the information only helps a certain amount. It's just my opinion, but I think there should be tons more lawsuits. However, it's hard to find a lawyer that will take it up. There was one doctor out of Minnesota I spoke to, and he said it's just hard to get any traction. The courts don't want to listen to this. The courts just throw these lawsuits out. The only time that a lawsuit gets upheld or gains traction is if a circumcision has been botched.
Start with that.
Yeah, I agree. And some people argue, some very nice ladies that I've spoke to in this movement have said, in my estimation, all of them are botched.
Right. Yeah, that's the gray area because I guess it would be up for the courts to decide what's botched, you know? That's an
Yeah,
opinion, right? I mean, because when the doctor's put on trial, they're always going to try to argue, no, that's normal, that's okay. So,
yeah,
what does botched mean, right?
yeah. So it's just amazing now how so many people minimize the harm and they stand steadfastly with their belief that this has to be done or it's the best thing to do. One of the guys that I spoke to in this movement way back in, I think it was 1988 or so, he was saying what they do is they like to blame the victim.
Yes, it looks that way. You do know when some parents are informed who have already done this to their son, it can blindside them with emotions of guilt
Oh,
and
yeah.
probably other negative ones. And when that happens, that's why they get defensive and their own feelings becomes their top priority. They don't want to feel bad. So that's what blocks out the information because the information is what's making them feel bad because the truth of this subject matter is it's bad, it's harmful, it's terrible. Do you have any ways of being nice when you talk to somebody to get around that, sugarcoating it somehow, kind of sneaking in,
Uh,
sneaking that it's straight on charging directly in?
I have very, very tactfully at times have said, this isn't necessary and it does harm. And then it doesn't even matter if you're nice about it. They get really defensive really quickly.
So you're saying that you don't know how to sneak around the defenses. You think there is no way, or you don't know how.
Most people are just plain defensive about the subject anyway. It's a roll of the dice. There's a couple of people I'd like to talk to about this, but I'm afraid that they would get very defensive and I'd lose a friend. And they're actually, decent friends to have, and they may have just been uninformed. Some people I know didn't know what it was. They were totally uninformed. The only people I've ever met that regretted doing it to their kids was moms. I've never met a dad that regretted doing it.
You know why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's because the dad's
I mean,
circumcised and it makes him feel
this
good about it happening to him.
remember Don Imus? Imus in the Morning had a show on the radio. It was like Howard Stern. He was a shock jock, and he was on with some Englishman, and Don Imus was saying how he had his son circumcised because he wanted him to look just like him. And this Englishman said, "That's very odd. I can't believe you Americans do that."
What else? Was that the
And
end?
that was about where it left off. I also found it interesting that Howard Stern, who's Jewish, is very much against this.
I know that. Yes. In fact, Howard has a podcast video. And people come into the studio, you see him and they talk. And Ron Lau came in one time, and Ron showed off the Tugger device. He invented it, which is the foreskin restoration device. Ron kind of advertised it on Howard Stern's show.
Howard used to poke fun at circumcision, and then all of a sudden he flipped real quick. He'd become very outspoken against it. And he's been against this since the 90s anyway. So that's been a long time.
The actor Gerard Butler was on there, and he asked Gerard, "Are you circumcised?" His answer was no. And then they went into detail, and Gerard was talking about sensitivity. Howard was certainly opposed to it. So he explained, "Yeah, I wish it wasn't done to me. And yeah, I'm sure you do have a lot more sensitivity." It gave me hope that Howard actually would want to have an activist interviewed on his show. We reached out, we never got a response that I know of. I'd like to go on there if he would talk to me or anyone else about this matter, because he has talked about it before, so I think he would.
Yeah, I think Ireland is going to have a problem with it very soon. And that's
Muslim
because there are,
immigrants.
yes, and England is going to have a problem with it, and Sweden's going to have a problem with it, and Germany's going to have a problem with it because that's a religious thing with them.
Yeah, why is it that they're allowing so many immigrants from the Middle East into their countries?
Well, I don't know, but I can honestly tell you that we were having the same problem of sorts here in the US. When you have lax immigration policies, you end up with a lot of illegal people. All you need to do is study the history of some religions, and I'm not going to say which ones, but some of them is to take over the world. That is their whole purpose. I was taking a class at a community college here back in the 90s. I decided to go back to school again, and it was an ethics class. And when I brought up the subject, boy, everybody's face just went really white. And one woman said, "Well, what happens if you're Jewish?" I said, "Well, can you think of any other body part that any other religion wants to cut off? Imagine a religion that tells you, okay, you have to cut off one of your fingers in order to be part of our religion." Some Muslim sects, they circumcise girls too. And it's also tend to be rampant, not amongst Muslims, but just in Africa. It seems to be quite bad. It's not a medical thing and it's not a religious thing. It's a cultural thing, like in the Philippines is with boys. They do it to boys in the Philippines because it's a cultural thing.
Does it really make a difference whether they consider it cultural or religious?
It doesn't seem to. When you're set in your ways, you're set in your ways. And even though when you give people the correct information, like I said, some people can be swayed if they have an open mind, but the majority of people I've spoke to, they either love it or hate it. And it's just that cut and dried. I'm seeing more people today that are against it than I used to. But if you go out to the Midwest where circumcision rates are really, really high, you won't get anybody to say, "Oh, I don't want to do that to my boy." They'll just conform.
Yeah, it seems to be that's the biggest factor is conformity. They're afraid of standing
Hmm.
apart from the crowd, even if it's for the better.
Yep, I know.
People want to
It
blend
can be
in, not be noticed.
it can be very, very disheartening at times. I'll give you a good example. A couple of years ago, they had a demonstration in Burlington, Vermont. I didn't go to it. These liberal snowflakes were going by and they were giving demonstrators the finger. They were absolutely rude.
Left wing people were to the
Yeah.
antagonists.
The average person was driving by and seeing the demonstrators. Burlington is very liberal, but boy, when this subject, they're not. Vermont, being the liberal state that it thinks it is still 8% over the national average.
Higher on circumcision, 8%
It's
higher.
about 63, 64% here. I tried to get the statistics for the hospitals, and Vermont doesn't track them anymore. The Department of Health does not track circumcisions anymore. But when it did, the last figures that I got was St. Albans, Burlington, and Rutland with the three highest hospitals. And of course, in Burlington's got UVM Medical, and that's the biggest hospital here in Vermont. And up in St. Albans, you had a pediatrician who ingrained it so badly that their circ rate's probably 90% up in St. Albans.
Was that the Fink guy?
Yep, I think his name was Aaron T. Fink or something like that. And he's dead now, but it doesn't matter. They keep promoting it. People keep buying it.
Right, because he left the belief behind. The people he worked for him believed it, so the people who took over kept doing it too.
Yeah, and I get into arguments once in a while on Facebook with some of these people that tell me I'm crazy, and they tell me you're making a big deal out of nothing. And they say I'm circumcised and I don't have any problem with it. I'm going, yeah, you drank the Kool-Aid, didn't you?
Well, it's also because they don't have a concept of having a foreskin. They've never experienced it, so they don't know any different.
Yeah. I told them that if they went to Jonestown, they would have all drank the Kool-Aid with Jim Jones, because that's the mentality. Just follow the crowd, do what everybody else is doing.
It seems to have created a cult.
Yep. Yeah, it does.
Do you have more to say?
I think we've covered a lot, and I do appreciate the time that you give me. Really, it was good to see you again.
Okay.
All right, that was Terry's full interview with Scott. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments down below. I'm going to put all of Terry's links down in the description. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss our other Intacticus content that we release every single week. Please share this video to get this out to more people. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Bye.
Uplift transition. Reboot the mission. No fear, no fiction. Truth in transmission. Prevail over the system. Our vision's the difference.